Hey folks, happy Halloween. Welcome to part 2 of my spooky special. In case you missed it, part 1 is already up and covers a recap and wider perspective of Hyrule's recent horrors, such as the Great Calamity and Upheaval. I've linked it below if you'd be so kind to check it out afterwards. In today's video, we will be expanding on part 1 and looking at the aftermath of all the destruction much more in depth. Today, we are visiting the unsettling ghost towns across the kingdom of Hyrule. From former landmark settlements to quiet and lesser known villages, let's take a look at recovering post-apocalyptic Hyrule's most unsettling ghost towns, and some of the lore and tales you might not have heard. Get your monster cake and healing potions ready, and as always folks, be sure to go and grab yourself a trick or treat and send them in to get featured right here. And let's explore Hyrule's unsettling ghost towns. On the outskirts of the Hyrule region, en route to the Snowfield Stable, we can find the very quiet remains of Tabantha Village, a former settlement on this main path. It wasn't very big in comparison to others, but it did fill this space very well. Life here would have been pretty cold, but enjoyable and manageable. A community likely all very close with each other, wood gatherers to ensure warmth, hunters and foragers to provide food, and possibly a small general shop as well for providing essentials and helping out travellers. A quiet and simple life. Outside of Rito Village, this would have been the only other village in Hyrule. As a small passerby settlement, it would have been really helpful for those seeking to explore the beautiful sights the Hyrule Mountains have to offer. Travellers probably stopped by here to make final preparations before taking on the mountain climb, as well as staying afterwards to rest up. At the foot of the village, there are a couple of ruined buildings beside this fencing. It's possible that this was where any cattle or livestock the village had was kept, as when you go further up, the houses become a little more dense and closely compact. In this day and age, there is one newly built home just a little further back down the road. It wasn't there in the time frame of Breath of the Wild, so it was built between the two games. When we find it, there are two travellers trapped inside due to a small group of bokoblins having set up camp outside. We can help them and be rewarded with food and some shield surfing knowledge. It's rather small and appears to be more of a public home that anybody can use on their travels. We don't really have much indication as to exactly what happened to Tabantha Village. However, given how the calamity went down, we can assume it fell due to the influx of monsters. Guardians didn't really make it this far, at least not in high numbers. I wouldn't rule it out, as even just one lone guardian could easily destroy a small settlement like this. However, I would say it was more than likely monsters that invaded and destroyed the village. It stands long buried in snow these days, untouched and possibly never to return, as the population is nowhere near what it once was. We can find a Bolson construction site just down the road, but this is as close to rebuilding as it looks to be getting. Sadly, Tabantha Village as a whole will likely never return to its full glory. Before leaving Hyrule, I'd also like to highlight Pondo's Lodge, a small cabin just over the hill from Tabantha Village in fact, which in the time frame of Breath of the Wild, just a few years prior to when Tears of the Kingdom takes place, a man by the name of Pondo ran a snowball bowling minigame here. It was definitely one of the highlights of travelling to and from Hyrule. Unfortunately, in the current day, we find it destroyed and half buried in the snow. An old bowling pin can even be found just poking out of the deep snow. Down at the bottom of the hill, where the pins would have been lined up, is now home to a construct camp on a fallen piece of sky debris. It's really sad to see that this former place of joy has fallen due to the effects of Ganondorf's upheaval. Thankfully, Pondo himself did survive. We can find him riding a horse on the nearby main path, which does go through Tabantha Village. I'm sure as he passes his former home, he feels a slight sadness, and I don't blame him. In the shallows of the Regencia River, we can find the Sage Temple ruins, a mostly destroyed and mostly unrecognisable temple which back in the day was most likely a place of worship to the ancient sages. Looking at it in its current state, it doesn't appear too big, but when you consider the overall area this covers, when the temple was fully built up, I imagine it was fairly large actually. Now, where these ruins get insanely interesting is the small but lore-packed expansion Tears of the Kingdom made. Due to the effect of the upheaval, caves have opened up across Hyrule, one of which can be found right here at these ruins. Upon jumping down, we can discover that not only does this temple have an underground section, but there is also a stone tablet which reads some very fascinating information. It reads, "A sword was enshrined in this temple to honour the sages. It was moved to Typhlo, north of the Great Forest of Hyrule." This is referring to the Sword of Six Sages, which we can get by completing the questline at Typhlo Ruins. This is a really cool piece of lore to learn, and I was a little jaw-dropped when I read this for the first time. In the past, the Sage Temple was home to the Sword of Six Sages itself, hidden beneath the main temple which people would visit and worship the sages. We can assume this place was considered a very significant landmark of the kingdom, so perhaps in the future it will be restored to its former glory, but given how things are following Ganondorf's defeat, it might take a little while before getting round to here. The Akkala region is known for how little we first found it with. When we first explored this kingdom, it was well known for its nature and beauty. However, by the time frame of Tears of the Kingdom, it has the likes of Terrytown, the Bolson construction site, and of course the stables. However, there is one massive landmark which stands strong: the Akkala Citadel, the former line of defense against any potential threats coming from the eastern coastline. A multi-layer tower fortress, equipped with cannons, height advantage, army barracks, and the best soldiers Hyrule would have had to offer, settled here. The fact that this place fell completely during the Great Calamity speaks levels to just how brutal the attack was on Hyrule, especially given how far from central Hyrule it is. We don't see much of what it was like back in the day outside of the Age of Calamity spin-off game. The inside was, as you'd expect, large. Unfortunately, in the modern day, all we find inside is a monster-filled cave, and in Breath of the Wild, nothing but a guardian block-up across the broken bridge. Hyrule's finest soldiers stood no chance against the ruthless guardians, and whilst fighting for their kingdom, they were ruthlessly wiped out. The Citadel still stands proudly strong today, reminding us of the titan it once was. We can find a few cool things at the top, such as this unique torch design which I haven't seen anywhere else, as well as a secret cave which leads to some hidden treasure. Just be careful if you venture up here, as there is a gloom spawn lurking around. On one of the lower levels, we also now find a fierce Thunder Gleeok, which is not to be messed with. Mabe Village is probably the ghost town on this list which suffered the most terrifying demolition. Located in central Hyrule just down the road from Castletown, this unfortunate settlement would have felt the brute force of the calamity very quickly. A mostly stone-made village, this one appears different in design to most towns and villages seen across the kingdom. It takes on an appearance a lot more similar to the outpost ruins we see across Hyrule. What this could mean is that it was possibly a working village, perhaps for mining in this nearby rock, or maybe metalwork such as blacksmithing or forging parts for various projects. It's also right next to the ranch ruins which we covered in a previous Ghost Towns video. Perhaps this whole area was one big working settlement. Now, what's interesting is that the depiction of Mabe Village pre-Calamity in the Age of Calamity spin-off isn't as stone heavy as we see in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. This is most likely just video game logic, as Age of Calamity was made by third-party developers. Regardless of design, I personally believe this area was full of workers given the location. It's hard to say, as little is truly known. The ruins are rather peaceful to walk through nowadays, aside from a few bokoblins wandering around, but the horror stories these ruins could tell must be horrifying. It would have been terrifying to witness the onrushing guardians coming your way with nowhere to run or hide. Those of Mabe Village likely didn't suffer for long, but that doesn't take away from the horror they went through. A village which often goes unmentioned in these sorts of lists is Goponga Village, a unique settlement built around the shallows of the Luneru wetlands. It's primarily set on one large main island, but does have extended areas on the surrounding islands. Unfortunately, the calamity completely destroyed Goponga Village too. There is little left to really tell us about the village. It appeared rather large, probably around a similar size to Tabantha Village, or maybe pushing up towards Dea Village. A nicely populated settlement on a popular route for travellers. Like many locations on this list, this ghost town is featured in Age of Calamity. It appears as most highly inbuilt settlements do, but a very interesting detail we can learn is that it appeared to have Zora influence. Given its location being right next to a river, and just down the road from Zora's domain, this makes a lot of sense. It's quite likely that Goponga Village was a fishing village, or at least had a focus on fishing for their living. In today's Hyrule, there are quite a few monsters surrounding the ruins. However, it is actually somewhat safe to travel through, as we can see the odd traveller walking through the middle. If you hop down the village well, you can find a book with some rather interesting text regarding climbing. I wonder who wrote this. It's unfortunate that Goponga Village fell, as I can only imagine how much I personally would have loved this place full of life. I really enjoy any aspects of fishing and the aquatic life in Zelda games, and I probably would have ended up spending a lot of time here if it had survived, or had even been restored by the time frame of Tears of the Kingdom. However, it unfortunately stands quiet as yet another ghost town in Hyrule. One of the most iconic and well-known ruins in this kingdom of Hyrule is the Temple of Time and its surrounding area. This is the first major landmark we saw in this world. Back in Breath of the Wild, when Link exited the Shrine of Resurrection, we learnt that the kingdom had been completely destroyed. And our first example of this is the Temple of Time. It stands half destroyed, with a haunting wind blowing through its holes, but yet lays peacefully as nature is taken over. Pre-Calamity, the temple would have been a place of worship to the goddess Hylia. People from far and wide across Hyrule would have travelled to the Great Plateau to be here. It would have been the home of this belief back in the day. Looking at past versions of the temple, we can only imagine just how beautiful this would have been in its prime. Now, the way in which it fell appears to be rather brutal. Guardians that flooded out from Hyrule Castle and rapidly throughout central Hyrule reached here and made easy work of a grand piece of architecture, including the smaller buildings in front of the temple, which also are believed to have been for some form of worship to the golden goddesses. Each of these three smaller ruined buildings have the symbol of each goddess: Din, Nehru, and Furore. We can't say for sure, but perhaps when people visited here, they would pray to each of the golden goddesses first, and work their way up to the goddess Hylia statue, and pray there at the end. There is so much we don't know about the birthplace of Hyrule, the Great Plateau. Fun fact about that, prior to Tears of the Kingdom releasing, there was a lot of confusion around why this place was considered the birthplace of Hyrule, as said by the late King Rome. Tears of the Kingdom reveals the backstory, in that this is where the original Temple of Time, Castle, and King and Queen of Hyrule were located. It all makes sense now. The Temple of Time stands as one of the most notable ghost towns and ruins across the entire kingdom, standing tall and engulfed by nature, home to a few bokoblins these days, and with no signs of a restoration project coming anytime soon. That concludes the ghost towns we'll be visiting for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed this part 2 to my Halloween special, and if you haven't already, be sure to go check out part 1, links below. I find myself with a strange sadness and nostalgia at the end of videos like this, despite never actually seeing what these places were like before disaster struck. If there are any other locations you'd like to see me cover and dive into their lore, then let me know in the comments. It can be ghost towns, unmarked locations, anything really. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and if you've enjoyed, then be sure to subscribe for more fabulous Zelda content from yours truly. That's me, by the way. A big thanks and shout out goes to my channel supporters for your incredibly awesome backing of the channel, with a super special shout out to new supporters, The Bread Pirate, Joe R, and Joe R, Callie, Joe Love. Welcome aboard, mateys. I offer behind the scenes posts as well as a shout out upon joining if you're interested in supporting the channel via the links below. You can also find my socials down there if you'd like to keep up to date with me. Thank you so much for watching, friends. I wish you all an amazing day or night, and until the next time, I've been Hyrule Gamer.